So listen, I'm just here to talk about the Aughrim Mausoleum and a bit about the graveyard in general. So, just going to have an overview of Kilmore Graveyard, the history of the Aughrim Mausoleum, the reconstruction of the mausoleum, and the culture and the community impact. So, the overview of Kilmore Graveyard is, it's a generational burial site. So, Kilmore Graveyard has served as a burial site, a ground for multiple generations of local families and significant figures. We've recorded over 300 burials when we transcribed and digitised the graveyard back in 2021 and 2022. Headstones on site date back to the 1600s and a lot prior to that as well. But the earliest we're going back is to the 1300s, but in terms of legibility, we know, when I'm talking about 1300s, I know stuff that's been dated in the National History Museum. But in terms of on site that's legible and readable, we're talking about the 1600s onwards. And so the graveyard has kind of, I'll talk about in a minute, but the graveyard has moved. And that might sound crazy, but it has moved and shifted with times. And what I mean by that is, so we know, and from Tommy's talk in 1232, that the original abbey was built by Con O'Callaghan, okay? Yeah. And ordained by Bishop O'Connor of Elphin. And then we know that up until the 1500s, 1580, when Queen Elizabeth took succession of it and transferred it over to Turl O'Farrell, and he in turn obviously rented the land to the first Protestant Bishop of Elphin, Bishop King. And so it stayed, when it went from the abbey under to Queen Elizabeth and her reign, it stayed, although it changed from Catholic to Protestant, it stayed in the Catholic abbey for another 250 years. So it was kind of unheard of, because normally they would demolish that building and they would build a Church of Ireland. But it stayed for another 250 years, as it was the abbey. It wasn't until the 1830s till the building came into complete disrepair, and that building and the stone was used to go down to Charleston House to build that building. So, and then they built the current Georgian Gothic style church that's there at the minute. But so the original abbey, maybe Tommy explained, so when you go into the graveyard you can see what would have been the original altar place of the original abbey. So when you go into Kilmore Graveyard you'll see that arch stone, yeah? And that would have been part of the original abbey. So why I say, and I'll come back to what I mean when I say the graveyard moved, but it is a thing that we'll see that the boundaries of graveyards and is a relatively new thing, okay? And I'll speak about that in a second. The graveyard contains remains of individuals important to the area's history, reflect on local heritage and culture. I know tomorrow when there's a walking tour, Tommy and Camilla will be talking about the many famous people that is buried in the graveyard. But just when I was going back through the document again today, I saw three people side by side. One of them goes back to the heirs of Roscommon, Dylan, who lived in Ballycumming House, okay? And he's right beside a man that was buried in, I think it was 1706, James Riley, who was a Church of Ireland man. And he went the whole way, he got a doctorate and his degree was in theology and divinity. And he went the whole way to Paris to get that. Now, that in 1706 was a big undertaking, and he was very well thought of. The two men are side by side down there. And the man next to them was a man who was murdered and shot in Manhattan. He was actually part of the 69 Infantry Regiment, a part of the US Army, which is connections back to the American Civil War. And he was shot in New York. And in fairness, the fight in 69 was also called the fight in Irish. They actually marched at his funeral in Manhattan. During the 60s, his body was repatriated. And he was brought back in the 60s, and he's buried beside the two men that I'm talking about. The reason I'm saying is that every plot down that graveyard has a story. And it's not until you go through the book or you delve into the stories that you see literally everyone has a story down there. The change in burial practices. Kilmore Graveyard reflects the evolution of burial customs and the community traditions over time. Both Catholic and Protestant shared graveyard. It's not absolutely unique. But there's not a lot of them if you go through Longford, Leitrim or Roscommon, that where it's a shared graveyard. Like if you look in Aughrim, Church of Ireland will be an added on section, as is in most places within Connacht. So, what I meant about moving graveyards, so I'm just going to go back to this. This is one of the most earliest ordnance survey maps we have of Kilmore village. You can see here where the police barrack used to be, where Little Mary's is now, it's the old post office. You come down, don't go into Gilfinnans, you come down to where the old rectory was, where Creighton's live now. Don't Kilmore in here, don't go for Ruski, come up to the church. You can see the church right here, okay? But what do you see here in the field across from it? Graveyard, which is Gilfinnans field currently, okay? So you will see that although the church was here, if you go back far enough, all around here was actually a graveyard. And so after the Second Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council was from 62 to 65. The church came away from owning graveyards, okay? And it came back to the local authorities, which is now Roscommon County Council, and caretakers and graveyard committees, okay? But before that, it was obviously the church owned it. And even people now come back and they ask me, have you any burial records? Has the church not got any burial records? No. Okay, so the graveyards and the cemeteries, it's a relatively new concept of in a boundary. Now we have land registry and folios. Okay, prior to that, it was a general area. It was a very lucid thing. There was no corn boundary of graveyards and cemeteries before that. Obviously, a graveyard is a church and burials around it. Cemeteries does not have a church or a place of worship in the middle. So, again, I talked about the 1600s. Obviously, we all know about the famous slab that is inside the gate, directly on the left-hand side at the gate, which dates back to 1357. Enid, daughter of MacBrannan, had me erected in 1357, and that's been verified by the National History Museum. See what the weather has done to it, and every winter in terms of frost and sunlight and the damage that it's doing to the headstones. And that really, when we were down there back in 2020 in COVID, when everyone had time on their hands, we decided that we had to do this, okay, in the graveyard. And that was to digitise and transcribe and record. Because the graveyard is so old, because there's so many stories there, because we're going back to the 1600s, it was so important that we started to transcribe, digitise and computerise everything that was in the current graveyard. Tommy talked earlier on about the two main headstones when you go in the church, Blackburn and King. None of them would have originally been in the church. All the plaques that's up on the wall, they'd have all been originally in the cemetery. Okay, they were put in there either for one of two things: damaged by Catholics who were resentful towards the British, or else they wanted to protect them and keep them in a prominent place. One or the other, but they would originally have been in the cemetery. So the ones where we knew were being protected, the ones outside weren't being, so that's why we started about that work. So origin and construction period. So the mausoleum was built in honour of the Aughrim family, prominent, and they were prominent. So if you look back, there's been a book about the Aughrim family and variation of the Aughrim family. Byrne, O'Byrne, B-I-R-N-E, B-Y-R-N-E, B-I-R-N. If you go back through the history of Kilmore, Cloncraft, Aughrim, and the Leitrim side, Drumsna and Jamestown, it's a very prominent family within this locality. The design of the structure was influenced by architecture trends prevalent during that construction era. So it was built in 1813, okay? So if you think about that for a second, the church we said was built in 1830. The mausoleum was built before the church, okay? The mausoleum is also a protected structure. So the mausoleum construction timeline reflects the area, typical building practice and materials of the day. And for anyone that doesn't know, when you go into the graveyard, it's down, and marked there, it's down on the left-hand side. So they greatly contributed to the local development and cultural growth of the community, the Aughrim family in this area. Mausoleums does go back to the ages, but they were very popular in Victorian times. So it was built before the church, and it is a protected structure. That's actually the keystone removed from the Aughrim mausoleum. So the Aughrim families, it was originally written in Gaelic form of Aughrim from the Norse surname Bjorn, and the name is of Old Norse origin and means bear. This is the family crest. The family crest did sit into the top of the mausoleum. Unfortunately, it has gone missing from the graveyard. So that's the one thing that we couldn't get back, is the family crest. And as I said, it was very prevalent in the surrounding areas. So I'm quickly going to read through this. The Aughrim was a Gaelic family located in the northeast of County Scommon who lost most of their lands in the 17th century. Aughrims belonged to almost exclusively to Connacht. One branch allied to MacDermots and other leading Roscommon families in the 13th century displaced the O'Mahons as chiefs of the territory called Trebrune between Elphin and Jamestown on the County Roscommon side of the Shannon. In 1850 there was still an Aughrim of Dangan Aughrim in that territory. The other branch possessed territory in the adjoining county of Mayo, north of Ballinrobe. At the present time, Aughrim was chiefly found in counties Roscommon and Leitrim. Dangan Castle, as we know, which is out here, was one of the main residents of the Aughrim clan, but was badly decayed by the early 17th century. Dangan House was built nearby and was occupied by the Aughrim family from the 17th to the 19th centuries. They held the Dangan from the King family. Aughrim Dangan, the families of Hugh Aughrim and Patrick Aughrim, were both descendants of Taig Aughrim, resident in Drumsna area in the early 18th century. These two branches of the Aughrim family were living at Jamestown and Dangan, the original Aughrim stronghold, in the early 19th century. Patrick Aughrim was the son of Conall Andrew Aughrim, chief of Aughrim's clan in the late 18th century. Andrew lost most of his property after the 1798 rebellion, and 4 of his sons immigrated from Ireland. Patrick remained at Dangan, and Aughrims continued to live there until at least the late 1830s. Aughrims from Drumsna, the Aughrim estate was centred on Drumsna, where they have a house at Jamestown. MacParlan includes Mr. Aughrim Jamestown on the list of resident gentlemen of property in 1802. Francis Aughrim and Hugh Aughrim of Jamestown served as the High Sheriff of Leitrim in 1831 and 1855. That's really like the living descendants in this parish. I mean, people probably know Joseph Aughrim and Feely, who obviously live in Feara over at the pitch. They're descendants from all of these families. All of the Aughrim families are all connected. Leitrim and Roscommon, they're all connected. So the mausoleum got into serious decay over the last number of years. You can see here 4 root ball of ivy trunks got in, and you can see it started pushing the front face of the mausoleum outward. Inside, in here, all the flagstones were gone off the roof, potentially taken, and all vegetation was going down through it. Inside, in the mausoleum, is an arched brick dome, and the problem that we're having is all of these bricks started falling down and breaking what was inside. So Aughrim Kilmore Development Association to the rescue. So a subcommittee was set up. Jerry Tiernan, who's here, chairman of the Development Association, Joseph Aughrim, and myself. So we met with Nullig Feeney, who is the heritage officer of County Roscommon. She's kind of the first stop for anything in terms of Roscommon in regards to heritage. And Nullig, in fairness, is a very easy lady to deal with, and she's been very good to us over a number of years on a number of different projects. And she helped us apply, and in fairness to Joseph Aughrim and Jerry, they did a lot of work in terms of applying for the funding for the Historical Structures Fund and the Built Heritage Investment Scheme from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and also Roscommon County Council. So we tapped into these 2 funds to see what we can do. But we knew that they weren't going to be, one fund was not going to do it. We knew at the very outset that it was going to have to be done in stage payments. So we get a grant, we do a bit of work, we go away from it, we get another grant, and we knew that that's the way it was going to have to be done. So access in the mausoleum. So it was first opened for inspection and was done twice in June 2019. So to get into the mausoleum is this little keystone here. Okay. The first problem we had is a grave was being put up right in beside it, and I don't know anybody here, but if you try and lift that stone out yourself and you can't get a grasp of anything, it wasn't a simple thing to get that keystone out. Trust me, myself and Bernie Sheridan spent many hours trying to get it out without damaging this grave on front. But that's the only way into it without damaging the roof coming down. As you can see, that's where the crest would have been, right here. So on inspection, we can see when we did get in, when you get in, you kind of go down, you crawl down into it. And we could see there's 2 lead-lined coffins, one of an adult and one of a child. Okay? And you can see here the bricks all falling down from the roof. So also inside there was cracks developing in the north, south, east and west, the walls from the ivy. Rodents were getting in. There's actually stalactites hanging down from the roof. It's something kind of you see in a Halloween film. But so it was seriously needed to be restored. So the inscriptions. So when we went in, we could see that the inscription in terms of the adult lead coffin, it was in Latin. Hugh O'Byrne remains were there. He died in 1813 at 74 years of age, and that the monument was set by his son Francis. Okay, that was the adult lead coffin, and the smaller coffin, which you can see the breastplate here, which was left on the coffin. It reads Fanny O'Byrne died the 25th of June 1875, and she was 5 years of age. You can see there 25th of June 1875, age 5 years. So they were the 2 that was inside. Now we also noticed that there was 4 other skeletal remains also in the mausoleum. But you can see this was really what was left. The bits of brass from the coffins, but all the timber had all disintegrated and had gone into decay. Possibly family members or whatnot. The next slide, for anyone that is squeamish, there is skeletal remains, so just for anyone that is squeamish. So here you can see this was beside the lead-lined coffins. There was skeletal remains laid out over the place. And also you can see that they're all left on a plinth. And this is the ground here, and this is up on a plinth. So all of the coffins were tilted with the feet on the ground and the heads up like this. Okay, so you can see the head that's up on the plinth there. So to remove the remains, obviously we had to speak to the Church of Ireland. Obviously we had to get direction from Nully Feeney, the Heritage Officer. Obviously we had to do everything in line with protocols. But ultimately the reality of it is they needed to be taken out. One thing I learned from a local farmer, he said, Trevor, just before you go in there, you do know that TB can stay in the ground for up to 250, 300 years. So be careful when you're taking them out. And as we were taking them out, and I was rushing, there was something on that day. But anyway, myself and Bernie Sheridan went about taking the remains out. And of course there was holes in the bottom of the lead-lined coffins. A lot of stuff came out, not very nice. So I'm not going to forget that morning in a hurry. But to be respectful of the remains and all the rest of it, we did not want to take them off site. So we got approval from the Church of Ireland that we keep them within the church while the ongoing restoration was to take place, and then we would re-intern them at the end of the process. So work gets underway. So Sweeney Architects were appointed by Aughrim Kilmore Development Association to manage the conservation grant work for the mausoleum. Because it's a protected structure, everything had to be done in a conservation way. In terms of line techniques, everything in terms of the stone, everything had to be done in a conservation manner. So Dermot Nolan and Associates were appointed as consultant engineers. Sean Moffat and Sons stonemasons were contracted to carry out the works. And a Section 57 declaration was granted from Roscommon County Council for the relevant works. So the design solution response was to stabilise the vault as a priority in advance of the removal of the vegetation and repairs to the stone facing of the walls and the roof repairs. So guys came in, the Moffats, who I have to say absolutely fantastic lads to deal with. You're dealing with a small Clune Common road. You can see there the digger coming in. You're dealing in a very small, tight space. We didn't want to disrupt anything in the graveyard. We want to be respectful of neighbours and traffic and all the rest of it. So you kind of really had to keep to a tight time scale, and we had to really have a plan of works and carry out them as best we could. So the coffin and skulls were removed. The south and east walls were propped in advance of the works. The area was scaffolded. The mechanical lift provided from access road to the north. The stone was strapped and lifted straight off up here. And the capstones were removed and labelled for the ones I was going to have to go back on that weren't damaged. The amount of soil and roots were not anticipated, so there was 4 significant root balls which had to be cut out and lifted off, and the soil was removed and the roots excavated. The centre of the vault was exposed and allowed to fall in. So once we removed the remains, we let the dome fall in, and that was to allow the workers to operate within the vault area. The barrel vault was cut back to a stable springing point as agreed with the consultant engineer. A concrete roof was cast in situ, located to minimise fill and position of the final roof, and a level made up to the receive of the roof stones, and they were pointed suitably, and the southeast corner was repaired and repointed. So I've run through that, but it is a hell of a lot of work that took a couple of years to get done. When the roof came off, you can see when the roof came off, that's what you're looking down into. And we decided, instead of putting back over that dome again, that we would be putting in a slab roof, because the slabs that had to go on top, the slabs that are being made now, it was too heavy and it would be too much fear that it would cave in again. We couldn't take that chance. So you can see here the lads screeding and getting the roof in place before the flagstones went back on. So the parapet needed to be repaired, needed to be taken down, repaired. The stones that were left, you can see we sprayed it all off and all the rest of it, but they were very badly damaged, and a lot of them missing. This was a lot of the work. New stone had to be dressed to match the existence of what was there. Again, that required a lot of expertise in terms of the stonemasons. The reinterment of the remains. So we got them blessed, we got them reinterned, we put them back up. It doesn't look like there, but they're actually sitting up on what they were originally sitting on, and we did the best job we could in terms of getting them back there in a respectful way. So preservation initiatives, the efforts of focus on protecting the mausoleum original features to prevent deterioration over time. The restoration works repairs damaged structures to maintain the mausoleum's historical value and appearance, and the preservation and restoration to ensure the mausoleum remains a meaningful landmark and for future generations. So the community participation, get that out, the local groups, the CE staff and the Development Association. So we know now we're not going to let vegetation grow on it again. We're keeping an eye on it. Anything that doesn't look right, we're on top of it straight away. We've also used the lads as a scheme to learn from the 2 Moffat boys, learning the old techniques. Vendor's Corner, which Tommy referred to earlier on, we redid that back in 2015. And again, we used the same project where we brought in local C staff lads who were untrained to stay with the Moffat boys for the week to learn the old techniques, because it's a dying breed, and that's why a lot of these works are held up. There's so few people doing that type of work now. The total cost was under 40k. Now people may say, "Oh, gee, that's an unbelievable amount of money." That didn't come from locally. We didn't have to fundraise. We didn't drain the Development Association. It was all grant aided, and we took our time. Got a bit of money, did a bit, got a bit, did a bit. And in fairness to Jerry Tiernan and in fairness to Joseph Byrne, they were over and back to Sean Moffat and explained the situation, and we had to work with them to get it done to the best of our ability. So you can see before and after. I think we've done it a bit of justice, and I think it will stand for the next 100 years. So that's it.